Hi, welcome to my podcast. This is the Kindle Chronicles, and today is October 18th, 2019, and I'm talking to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I have quite a technical challenge. I can't remember if I've ever had this problem putting the show together, but we were up at Ocean Park for a couple of days, and I packed up kind of quickly, and I left the power cable to my computer there at the cottage up at Ocean Park, and so I have 60% of the battery left, and I'm not exactly sure. 60%. I think that's enough to get the show out, but I have the interview done and edited, and I'm going to be talking about a news story, but pretty quickly getting this up onto the net before the computer dies, and might be a little shorter than the usual 45 minutes. I received a link to a story that was sent to me by John Aga, a listener, who keeps an eye open for me for lots of stories. I really appreciate, those of you who see things, and I think maybe you've got your search engines on Google and different places set to find things, as do I. But anytime you do see something you think might be of interest to the show, please send it to me at podchronicles@gmail.com. Sometimes I've already seen it. I can't use everything, but it really does help me to have lots of different eyes out there on things that might be of interest. This one came from John, and it's from a publication I'm not familiar with. It's bleepingcomputer.com, and the headline of this story was "Millions of Amazon Echo and Kindle devices affected by Wi-Fi bug." Well, that sounds pretty scary. This was by Lawrence Abrams, and it was published on October 17th. The story makes it clear that this vulnerability, first of all, it's rather old, and second of all, it only applies to two of the Echo and Kindle devices, and Amazon has fixed it and sent out repairs, which probably everyone has. But I'm going to tell you about it just because I want to underline the importance of, if you have a Kindle or a Fire and you want to have it connected to Wi-Fi every once in a while. I don't see any reason not to connect it to Wi-Fi most of the time, because if a device is in your home and it's on Wi-Fi and you're not paying any extra for cellular data, then if there is an update that comes across the Wi-Fi, you'll have it, and these kinds of problems are something that you just wouldn't need to worry about. But in any event, this one is called Crack, K-R-A-C-K, and that stands for Key Reinstallation Attack. It's an old Wi-Fi vulnerability, and it applies to the first generation Echo. That's an Alexa device, and that's the one which was introduced in June of 2015. The second generation was October of 2016. So if your Echo device is newer than October 2016, this is something you wouldn't have to worry about. It only applies to Echoes that came out in the first wave in 2015. And then the crack vulnerability is also something which can affect an 8th generation Kindle, and that's the basic Kindle that was introduced in June of 2016, and that was the first Kindle that had Bluetooth that you could use to play audio. The risks that this vulnerability could lead to under the right circumstances, if somebody found it and used it, it could disrupt your network, it could decrypt data, and it could intercept information like passwords. So stuff you don't want to have happen, and that's why it's worth taking note of it. The way these things work, people find them. The security researchers who found this one reported it to Amazon in October of 2018. Marty Van Huff and Frank Pisons. They are from an outfit called ESET Smart Home Research Team. And Amazon on January 8th, 2019, earlier this year, said that they had prepared a patch and that they were going to upload it so that anybody connected to Wi-Fi would receive this patch in the latest update of the firmware. So that's quite a while ago, January. And that's why this is the kind of thing that if you have your devices, if you have these two devices and you have them connected to Wi-Fi enough, then I'm sure that you've gotten the patch. So that's the little vulnerability which is out there. The Kindle can seem like kind of a cuddly little safe device, but anything that connects to the internet can give you trouble, and Amazon, I think, keeps pretty good tabs on updating the firmware all the way back to the original product. So even if you have an older device, they're sending out, they're playing tag and staying ahead of the people that are trying to install malicious software in these devices. So stay connected to Wi-Fi, and I'm sure you'll be okay. My guest for this week's episode interview is Cristi Ross Crain, who has been visiting us in Cambridge and Maine, and we've all taken some day trips to take in the fall foliage. This was during her first ever trip to New England. Christi and my wife Darlene have been friends since they were fourth graders in Belle Fourche. That's a small town in the Black Hills of South Dakota, about 80 miles north of Mount Rushmore. For the past 40 years, Christi has lived in Upton, Wyoming, which is about 70 miles southeast of Belle Fourche. Upton, by the way, is the town with the least population in the county with the least population within the state that has the least population in the U.S. That's Upton in Weston County in Wyoming, which clearly has the least population of any state. So it's a small town, and it's a very sparsely populated county in a very sparsely populated state. For the past 40 years, Christi has lived in Upton, and last year she retired after 39 years as an elementary school teacher. In 2012, she had been named Teacher of the Year for the Weston County District 7 School District, and that led to an interview that the State Department of Education did with her. It's available on YouTube, and I want to play a brief excerpt from that interview before we get to my conversation, because in it, Christi talks about the importance of teaching kids how to read.
One of my biggest concerns is that the children learn how to read for enjoyment. And so I don't want them to think that reading is just homework or something they have to do. So I really stress to the kids how much I love to read, and we really work on that over the year. I do a lot of read-alouds in class and to get the children to enjoy books. And we just finished Old Yeller, and they really enjoyed that. So I think that's probably one of the best things I do. And I went into teaching so that I could make a difference in students' lives. And so, if you can't read, it affects your life totally. So it really makes a difference in their in how they grow up and what their future is.
Christi grew up working on a ranch in Wyoming, and when I hear her talk, both on that recording and also in person here when she's visiting, I hear a calm, encouraging voice that I can imagine helping children enjoy school throughout nearly 4 decades of her teaching. She is quiet but not shy, confident but not pushy, and endlessly curious about the world around her. That's something that we've noticed as we've been hosting her, and it means that we've learned a lot about our home here, from Old Ironsides to the Freedom Trail to the foliage in western Massachusetts and the delights of visiting Maine during a down-easter storm. Her experience as an elementary school teacher has a particular interest to me because we see so much of our grandsons, Jake and Ryan, who are 6 years old and 3, and I've seen them love books, and Mike and Rue giving them so many opportunities to enjoy books being read to them, and now, kind of reading along at this point. And Jake, who's in kindergarten now, is getting a lot of reading at his school here in Cambridge. For this week's show, Christi and I spoke in a book-lined den in the cottage in Ocean Park. This was on Wednesday, October 18th, and I began by asking how long she has lived in Upton, Wyoming.
Well, I've been there since 1979, right after I graduated from college at South Dakota State University.
Yeah. You arrived in Upton as a teacher.
Yes, I did.
What were you teaching when you started out?
I started teaching first grade.
Oh. And before that, you had lived in Belle Fourche, but your family had a ranch that was in actually across the border in Wyoming.
In Wyoming, yes, near the Bear Lodge Mountains of Wyoming, northeast Wyoming.
Uh-huh. And did you spend a lot of time on the ranch?
Oh, yes, yeah. Till I was about 16 or 17. and then they sold it.
Riding horses?
Yeah. Chasing cows.
Yeah.
Living the good life.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was that like?
Oh, I think I had the most amazing childhood.
Yeah.
It was a very close community. All the neighbors would come down for card parties, and they'd come down to help with brandings, and we'd have to move the cattle every summer up to the mountains so that they could farm the ranch land below. We had 2 different places. So we'd have to trail the cows up the highway about 15 miles after they had been branded. And it was just a really good time.
And would you go along on those, was that a roundup? Is that what you call a roundup? Or
yes.
Just moving the cattle?
We call it moving the cows for the summer pasture.
And you do that as a girl of 10 or something on a big horse?
Or older.
Yeah.
I still remember being stopped along the highway by a station wagon by a family from New York, the state of New York. And they'd never seen anything like cows moving up the highway, and they wanted us to get off our horses so they could take a picture. And all the kids were hanging out the window just in awe of the cowboys and the horses.
And it was sort of, they probably thought you were like in a zoo, and you probably thought they were like in a zoo.
I thought, what is so special about this? I mean, that was my life.
Yeah. So then arriving in Upton, first grade, how many children would be in your first grade class back then?
I had 12 in my very first class, which was a nice size to start with.
Describe the building. What was the school?
Well, it was fairly new. It hadn't been built too long before I got there. It was a nice building.
Yeah.
We had a lot of good money for schools back in those days.
Yeah.
And,
How many grades in the building?
There were 4 grades, kindergarten through 3rd grade.
Right. And then where would the kids go in 4th grade?
We had another building across the street where they'd go for 4th and 5th.
Yeah. And then they go all the way through high school in Upton.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. So you taught first grade for quite a while?
I taught first grade for about 22 years. And then I felt like it was time for a change.
Yeah.
So I moved to 3rd grade. And I was there 15 years, maybe somewhere in there.
You saw lots of people grow up, and you started seeing people with children who you knew when they were in first grade.
Yes, I taught children of children that I had had.
What was that like?
Well, it made me realize I was starting to get a little older.
Yeah. Would you remember some child's father or mother and say, "Oh, I recognize this"?
Oh, yes. And the kids always said, "Was my dad bad when you had him?" And so I tried to be diplomatic, but sometimes they were and sometimes they weren't.
Huh. Well, now, reading interests me because, Ryan and Jake, 3 and 5, Jake just turned 6 yesterday. Rue, my daughter's very interested in them reading. They read a lot to them. What did you see about the way kids learn to read and the different paths that kids right from that first grade on up? Some end up probably loving books, reading a lot. Some don't. Did you form any kind of understandings of how different children relate to books and reading?
Yes, if they had experience from a very young age with books, they did better at learning to read, and they liked to read a lot better. Also, if the parents at home read and the children saw that, they were also a lot more interested in it and learning it.
And if a kid didn't have that kind of advantage at home, when you were reading books to them, would they just not be interested, or what?
Often. I mean, you can't say that about every child, but yeah, they struggled to read if they hadn't been approached with books from the time they were young.
Yeah.
I started with my own children when they were first born. We read every night before I put them to bed, and I made sure, because I knew what it was like to be a teacher, I made sure they knew the alphabet and the sounds before they got to school. But a lot of parents didn't do that, and then the children get off to a poor start when that happens.
And that's a handicap that probably just follows them the whole rest of their schooling.
We do our best to try to catch them up and work with them, but it doesn't always happen.
One thing I've noticed with Jake and Ryan is they seem to really be little narrative consumption machines. The things they see on the TV, not so much in the books, so they love the books. And it makes me wonder if there's something, very human, that at a very young age, the mind is so able to follow a story and be excited about a story and want to retell a story. But is that sort of basic narrative element something that you've seen in kids and have any kind of understanding on why they seem so compelled by it?
I really am not sure, but when I first started teaching in '79, Star Wars was big.
Yeah.
And they all would bring the little toys and things from Star Wars to school, and that's all they'd talk about. A few years later, then there'd be something else.
Yeah.
That was big. Pokemon came in there, and a lot of, particularly boys, would get obsessed with things like that, and video games.
Yeah.
And some get so obsessed that that's all they'll think about at school.
Huh.
So it's hard to sometimes teach them because they're not interested in just seeing somebody in the classroom talking to them, but they get so overwhelmed with the visuals of TV and movies and things like that sometimes it's hard to break through.
And like the Star Wars world, it was sort of like a whole world, and they get sort of obsessed with being in that world.
Yes, particularly boys. I can see that more so in boys.
Huh. Well, what are the girls doing by comparison?
Very often we're more interested in just reading the books, and of course they could sit better in class and concentrate better than the boys at those ages.
Right.
And that's a normal thing. They didn't seem to get as attached to like the Star Wars, things like that, but they would have their little dolls and their little things that a lot of times they would talk about.
Yeah.
That they'd see on TV and advertising. Advertising gets to the kids. It really does.
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, when you see the power that these shows have, the opportunity to sell things, it's got to be very tempting.
Yes.
Yeah. Lego is the big thing now. It seems like everything has to do with Lego and Ninjagos and it's sort of like multi-dimensional, because Jake particularly has a Lego table and he builds stuff, and then he goes and he watches the Lego movie, and then we had to go to Lego Land, and it's like coming at him on all different media.
Huh. So sometimes if you can introduce them to some other things, it will help get them away from what they might be obsessed about at that time.
Yeah. Well, now, when you've talked about Upton, and the one thing that just always strikes me is that I understand if you go to the grocery store, you don't lock your door. I mean, sometimes maybe we do that. But when you go away on a vacation for 10 days, you don't lock the door.
Well, there's no need to. The worst thing that might happen there is somebody steals another kid's bike, and then the mom makes them take it back when they discover that happened.
Yeah. Well, has nobody ever had their house broken into in Upton?
Well, probably, but it's very rare.
Yeah.
Very rare.
Do you even have locks on the doors?
Yes, we do, but I don't even know where the house key is. So it wouldn't do us any good to lock it, and we couldn't get in.
Well, and some of it is that you've got neighbors that would be watching here, and they know.
Oh, they know
which place you were on your trip and everything.
Yeah, they know everything.
They could text you if something happened.
That's right.
What else do you think is maybe shocking or surprising for somebody that lives in a city about just your ordinary life in Upton?
Well, our children play outdoors all the time and ride their bikes to school and walk to school, and there's no thought about them needing to be safe.
Yeah.
They'll get there, and if they have trouble, somebody will stop and give them a ride.
Yeah.
And we just don't have worries like that. They, when they're out playing with other children, and I walk to the post office, and sometimes I walk to the grocery store, and I don't have any concerns about my safety.
Do you think that your daughters growing up in that safe an environment ended up being more confident, too trusting? I mean, what kind of qualities do you think they picked up from that kind of a childhood as opposed to being raised in Cambridge, where people would be very careful of sending their kids to school alone, or having that sort of sense of protection against potential danger that's sort of all around you?
Well, I think they adapted well once they started living in big cities. My oldest daughter is in a big city, and she doesn't seem to have concerns. She does lock her doors.
Yeah.
I mean, she does not leave without locking her doors. And my youngest daughter has now moved to a city that has a high crime rate, and she's concerned, but she knows that if she's just aware of her surroundings and everything, that she'll be okay. And
I'll interrupt here to provide a little context to what we talk about next. Christi's a very thoughtful guest, and when I was forgetting that one of her daughters lives in South Bend, which is where Mayor Pete is basing his candidacy for the presidency, something I'm following pretty carefully, she was thoughtful enough not to disparage or cast aspersions on South Bend, because she knows I'm such a fan of the mayor there. So she initially tried to kind of not bring that out in our conversation, but when I pressed, it came out, and it made me smile.
She's heard gunshots, and that it concerns her, but I think she's getting used to it and adapting to it.
Yeah. So. Now that's Boise?
That's South Bend.
Oh, South Bend. Oh, I thought Pete had made South Bend a utopia with no crime.
Oh, no, it's still
there's
pretty
gunshots in South Bend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she moved there just recently, right?
Yeah, so a month ago.
You were out there visiting.
Yes.
She lives near Notre Dame.
Yes, about a 10-minute walk from Notre Dame.
Yeah. And Michaela, she just got a degree, and what's she doing?
She just got her doctorate in pharmacy, and she's working for St. Joseph's Hospital there in South Bend as the hospital pharmacist.
Yeah. And then what's Lindy doing in Boise?
And she works, she got her master's degree from Duke University, and she works for a company called Clearwater Analytics.
Uh-huh. So start out in Upton, and you can do anything you want in the world.
Yes, both of them are very well traveled. Lindy in particular has traveled the world.
Huh.
And that actually was part of her degree at Duke. It was a cross-continental master's program.
Really? Huh.
And so they had to travel to other countries like China, India, live there for 2-3 weeks and study some of the business culture and practices.
And you retired last year after how many years of teaching?
39.
39?
Yes.
All in that same school?
All in the same school district, same school.
And you did first grade, third grade, then what other?
I did 2 years in fourth grade, too.
But just 3 grades for the whole 39 years?
Yes.
Which grade did you like the best?
I liked third grade the best.
Why was that?
Starting to get more independent. You didn't have to tie their shoes, and you didn't have to help unbutton their pants when they needed to use the restroom. Yeah. And third graders can do all of that. And so there have been moments when children have gotten sick on me, the little ones, because they don't know it's happening. And third graders never did that. So, you know, the joys of being a teacher. So
I can imagine thinking that it would get boring to do third grade over and over, first grade, the other grades for all of that time. But you've never seemed like you were bored with the work. What about it enabled you to stay fresh and stay creative? And
every year it was a new group of kids, and they all brought their own challenges and gifts. And so, you'd start over every year, brand new.
There'd be some similarities, but just the fact that the personalities of the children were so different. Each year you might not know whether what you did the year before was even going to work.
Right. Yes. And you change things. Some things you like, and you keep them the same.
Yeah.
Another thing, though, was when technology started coming in. I really liked technology, using computers and things like that. And that brought in a new dimension as teachers also that I liked.
Yeah. Now, we were talking about, the guest I had last week, James McQuivey, talked about 20% of people are early adopters like me, and 20% are very resistant, very scared that Alexa is listening to them, and all of that. And you said you were probably in the 60% that's in the middle.
Yes.
How would you describe your kind of personality as it relates to new technology?
Very interested in it, but I would want somebody else to work out all the kinks and the problems first, and then I would dive in and do it that way. So,
what are some of the technologies that have had the most impact on your teaching?
Well, I think just the ability to access so much information online. Yeah. There's a lot of educational sites that are good for the kids and virtual field trips, virtual reality field trips, and it just has brought in a whole new dimension for that.
Virtual, where they're wearing headsets, or
no, where they can get online and tour sites and historical sites and see all of that, like they're there.
Right. Have you had chances to connect with kids in China or have sort of social connections using the technology?
Other teachers I know have done that. I never did actually do that. But yeah, it's possible. They do it.
You must see kids coming to school with widely varying experiences of technology in their homes.
Yes. There are some children in the area who don't really have access, mostly because of financial problems. And so they don't have as much access to it, but for the most part, most of them do have it through their parents' cell phones and different things like that.
Yeah, there's kind of a baseline of, everybody has a toaster, everybody has a cell phone.
Now every child in our school has their own personal device on their desk.
Like a laptop?
Like a laptop. And the older kids are allowed to check them out and take them home, all the way from middle school to high school, if they need to.
Have there ever been any Kindles in the school in an organized way?
Not in an organized way, but I tried to encourage my kids to bring Kindles to school for the silent reading when they could just read for enjoyment for about 20 minutes. And I did have several do that, and they would have books downloaded on there and read.
And that'd be the black and white, paperwhite type Kindles, not those fire, And how about your reading? When you're reading, let's see, you said you're reading Bill O'Reilly's, what's the...
Killing England, right?
So it's a history of...
It's a history of the Revolutionary War.
Oh. So from sort of the English point of view, or?
No,
from our point of view. Oh, Killing England. It's like when we killed England.
Right.
Because all of his books are like killing something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Killing Lincoln, killing Kennedy.
Yeah. So when you're reading that, how are you reading it on paper and iPad? Or?
I'm just reading that in just a regular hardcover book. But I do read on Kindle. I've read some of Dan Brown's books on the Kindle.
And that's like a paperwhite or this sort of...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
When do you read hardcover versus Dan Brown on Kindle? What's the difference in which one you reach for?
I just, whatever's available to me at the time. And I bought the hardcover book about Killing England a while back, and so I just picked it up here recently and started reading. And I don't think there's any real compelling force to make me do it one way or another.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you worked 39 years in the same profession, the same school, and now, especially this year when your husband Randy retires, you guys could, your life could look any way you want it to look.
Yes, it could.
Is that kind of overwhelming, or have you had a long plan of, oh boy, when I retire it's going to look like this, or what is your retirement looking like these days?
Well, we've had a long plan of wanting to travel, which we are starting to do.
Yeah.
We're leaving for Rome and Greece here in just a couple of weeks. And then next September we'll be going to the British Isles. And we're just checking some of the traveling things off of our bucket list.
Yeah.
And in fact, this trip to Boston was on my bucket list. I've always wanted to see New England in the fall.
And you've been keeping track of how many states you've set foot in, right?
Yes.
You're able to click some off.
I'm up to, I was at 30, and then when I came out here, I'll be up to 35.
Right.
So.
This is when Darlene and you go to Rhode Island and Connecticut?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because we drove a little bit into Vermont over the trip out to see the foliage. When you're traveling to these places, are you hoping to learn about the place or just be in a different environment, or what's sort of the payoff for you when you do that kind of traveling abroad?
A little of all of that, but I really love history, and so when we go to Europe, I love to see the castles and hear the history of the area. And then out here in Boston, I've just seen so much of historical things that are relating back to what I'm reading in Killing England.
Right. Yeah. Let's finish up with Wyoming. I mean, I lived in Wyoming 20 years. I moved there when I was 30, and Darlene and I lived there for 20 years, and then moved to Denver. If you were going to describe the state as a whole to someone who had never been there, or maybe their spouse had been transferred to Wyoming and they're going to be moving there from Connecticut or something. How would you get somebody ready to live in Wyoming for a long time?
Well, it depends on where they come from.
Yeah.
So, it is a conservative state.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it's very flat and plain, and then there's some of the most beautiful scenery in the world out there, too.
Yeah.
If you're looking for that with Yellowstone and all of that.
Tetons.
It's pretty independent. A lot of people are pretty independent.
Mm-hmm.
The blizzards don't usually slow us down much, and you just learn to live with the cold weather, and it will get very cold, sometimes down to 30 below in the winter for those really cold spells, and a lot of snow. When we get snow, it stays. Once it comes in December, it'll stay through the end of March before it melts off. And so you have to be prepared for the weather in the winters. And
I was struck when I first moved out there from New England, be driving along a road, maybe up in northeast Wyoming where you live, and I'm driving, don't see anybody, and a car comes the other way, and they wave at you.
They give you the Wyoming wave.
What's the Wyoming wave?
You're holding onto the steering wheel and you put a finger
up. Oh, you put a finger up.
That's the Wyoming wave.
What does it mean?
It means glad to see you. Hello.
Glad to see another person
acknowledging you. Yes.
Yeah. I was really struck by that. I loved it. I thought, gosh, that wouldn't happen in New England. Well, first of all, you'd be doing it all the time. You'd get carpal tunnel because you'd be waving at thousands of cars.
No, you don't have to wave very often. Just once in a while.
And if you see somebody on the side of the road, you're going to stop because it could be life-threatening.
That's right.
Just be stuck out there. Yeah. So you have an independence and you have an interconnectedness at the same time, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Barn raising.
Everybody takes care of everybody else if they need it.
Yeah. I always love that phrase you'd hear that Wyoming is a small town with very long streets.
Yes. I had not heard that before, but that's appropriate.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't grow up there, but people that, if you lived in Sheridan and your friend lived in Casper, that you saw debates or sports things, you had history of people, even though it took 5 hours to get to them on a bus or something.
Yes.
Good. What's the next book you're going to be reading?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Do you have any recommendations?
Boy, I should. I've got all... there's a science fiction writer I heard about last week called Neal Stephenson that really sounded compelling. And then when I talked about it, I've got a friend in Fairbanks who's really well read, and he said, "Oh, Neal Stephenson, you've got to read him." And I think he's got a book out that is sort of imagining a world where virtual reality is kind of the way everybody relates to everything, which sounds terrifying to me. But I think 20 or 30 years ago, he wrote a book that had an uncanny prediction of what it was going to be like when something like the internet came. So interesting to see what somebody who's got that kind of a track record is seeing into the future.
Well, that sounds interesting.
Might be your next book.
It might be.
All right. I have been speaking with Cristi Crain, visiting us in New England this week from Upton, Wyoming. Thanks very much, Cristi.
You're welcome.
Well, we're doing pretty well with the battery. It's showing 42% left, and that gives us, I think, a pretty good chance to finish up here and do the show notes and get this onto the internet for you. I ordered a new charger from Amazon, and it will be delivered tomorrow, naturally. And all my computer has to do is to make it until then. For next week's show, I will be talking with Kurt Beidler, Beidler. He is Amazon's Director of Kids and Family. I had reached out to them because I would like to know a little bit more about the new Kindle Kids edition and the expansion of Free Time and Free Time Unlimited to new devices. This was something which was announced and talked about quite a bit at the event in Seattle that I went to a few weeks ago. I'm also, I think, going to have a chance to get a review copy of one of these Kindle Kids editions, and it'll be embargoed for a while I won't be able to talk about it for next week's show, but I'll be catching up with that just to let you know how that differs from the basic Kindle and what you get when you buy a kind of a bundle of the new Kids Edition, plus a case, plus some other features. I think it's a nice expansion of the ability to use Kindle and Fire devices to interest kids in reading, as Christi was talking about. I had quite a difficulty with my Alexa flash briefing over the past week. And in fact, what happened was that it was going up fine. I would record on my iPhone, and I do about a 2-minute thing on the Alexa skill. But actually, I think it was about a week ago, it just stopped working, and I couldn't get the update to go up for my iPhone. And I reached out to some technical support on the Alexa Blueprint team, and got a couple of guys that just really dug into the problem, and we were doing screen shares back and forth, and I copied a long bit of code which somehow got captured as I was doing it, and about 2 or 3 days ago it finally was fixed, and I was able to put up fresh content that everyone could hear as of, I think, let's see, today is Friday, maybe Wednesday was the first time I was able to resume these updates. Now they seem to be going up fine, and there's been a big improvement from even when it was working. When I recorded one of these, it would take 5 to 7 hours for it to go live, so that if you were subscribing to it as an Echo skill for your Echo devices and as a flash briefing, and if you said what's new, it would be one of the things you'd hear. Now, when I put one of these up, they are live, I think, in a matter of minutes. So I recorded one as an example of what I'm doing in these. And I think, not everybody who's interested in this podcast is going to be interested in the morning journal that I'm putting up as an experiment. But I'll play the one that I did today. I got up very early before sunrise, went out to the beach with my phone and recorded this and put it up so that if you were subscribed to the morning journal, this is what you would have heard today. Alexa, what's new?
Len, here are the stories you haven't heard yet today. From Len Edgerly's Morning Journal, here is today's message.
Good morning. I am at Ocean Park, out on the beach, about a half hour before the sun actually comes up, but the sky has turned pink and salmon-colored, and there is a meeting of seagulls in front of me, standing right at the edge of the foam as the waves break on the low tide sand. They're silhouettes. They just look black from here. They're in the way the light is hitting them. And I don't know why they've decided to meet right here, but there were maybe 6 or 8, and then over the last 10 minutes while I was sitting here, others would arrive and settle down into a place that was apparently the right spacing between the others, and they're just kind of hanging out there by the foam. Sometimes seagulls fly right overhead as if they're checking out whether this is a meeting they want to join, and then they just keep on going. The sky has settled down after the nor'easter a couple of nights ago. The ocean is calmer, just the ordinary waves rolling in. The Wood Island Lighthouse is flashing alternately a green light and a white light. I imagine that has some meaning in the nautical world. And there's a big cloud bank that looks to me like the shape of a super yacht, kind of headed to Boston from here, aiming south. I like the period just before the sun rises here, because sometimes the light is even more dramatic than when the sun just pops up over the horizon. And there's a feeling of potential that, well, the birds are waiting, I'm waiting, and maybe you're waiting for the sun to come up wherever you are. And it's going to be a whole new day with the sun shining or behind the clouds or wherever it's going to be. But I like these parts of potential at the start of the day, and glad to share it with you. Thanks for listening. Bye.
If you'd like to hear the Morning Journal each morning, just Google Alexa Skills and then search for Morning Journal and then click on Enable. Then it will become part of your feed, and then there's ways you can manage your feed. If you've got others news that shows up like BBC, you can have the Morning Journal be part of that, or if you just want to listen to the Morning Journal, you can set it up that way. You can also find it by going to the skills setting in your Alexa app on your phone and going that way. I'm very grateful to my friend Cass Woodward, who left the first review. If you go into the listing for the skills and open the Morning Journal, there's a place where you can leave a review and rank it, which is fantastic, because I think that one of the things which intrigues me about this is there's relatively few flash briefings available. I think about 9,000 compared with 900,000 podcasts out there. So one that gets started relatively early and gets a few reviews, and maybe there'll be a chance for the audience to grow. I'm doing it for the creative delight of it, and an audience will be something which is adds to the pleasure in the same way that the audience for the podcast does. And I have heard from some of you who are listening and have said it's a kind of a gentle voice and sensibility here first thing in the morning. And that's my intent. And then as I do it every day as a practice, I will be intrigued to see what am I trying to share insights? Am I describing a scene? Am I basically just kind of saying good morning to a group of people in a way that it helps me to find the right way to greet the morning and to share that those first moments of the morning with people who might be listening. As you can tell, I'm pretty excited about this project. I'm so relieved at these guys at Amazon that worked with me. Even, over the weekend, I was sending these really plaintive pleas of, I feel it's like a tree falling in the woods. I'm putting these up and nobody can hear them, and they would respond with emails and troubleshooting, and I just couldn't have been more impressed and grateful that these guys that I've never met before were helping me to get my baby onto the internet in a way that not only was working as well as it was before the problem, but in the process they worked on the latency of the how long it takes for the uploads to be on the internet, and really did a fantastic job. So another example of wherever I touch Amazon or Amazon touches me, I end up with people that seem to really care about what they're doing in kind of a missionary way. That's it. We are at 34% of the battery on the computer, so we better get this baby up on the internet so you can hear it. And thanks for listening.